Today we are studying Ezekiel, and here's a couple of fun facts for you about Ezekiel. It's a strange book. It is so strange that in many traditions you have to be in your mid-30s before you're allowed to read it. You actually are only ever supposed to study it in a group. It is probably the number 2 book below Revelation for ones that people start reading and say, all right, this is too odd, I'm moving on. Which means it's on the short list of what the Bible study is going to probably study after we get done Revelation. Because that's half the fun right there, is the weird ones. But Ezekiel, we read his call story, at least part of it, this morning. Susan did. He was called while he was in Babylon. He was actually a part of the first group that was taken from Jerusalem to Babylon during the 500 BCs. That was not actually part of the exile. The exile came a few years later. It was this time in between the first wave of people getting brought to Babylon and the actual exile, the destruction of Jerusalem, that Ezekiel heard his call. His beginning message during this in-between time was one of repent, for judgment is coming. It was especially to the leaders and to the religious leaders to get their act straight, both to worship God rightly, but also to take care of the poor, to take care of those who needed help. For the religious and political structures stopped doing that. But when the exile came, his message changed. No longer was it one of judgment, the way he was kind of with Jeremiah at that point, but it changed to one of hope, to one of God is with us even here, and God will bring us home. He was also one of the first people in the Old Testament to say that you are actually responsible for yourself. And what I mean by that is, in the Old Testament, when you read in the beginning, you hear that God will punish the sin to the 7th generation, all that fun and chipper stuff. Or that, if your parents were good people, then you'll have blessings and joy through your whole life. Ezekiel is one of the first to say that is not true. That really you are accountable for your actions, both the good and the bad. And that your actions are more than just what you do, but they're what you and your neighbors are doing together. It's a pretty important shift. And that's where we're coming at this. We are actually about to read one of his prophecies that most likely happened after the exile had begun. And people were discouraged and fearful, and it spent a generation of war and pain and suffering. So this is what he says in chapter 34, verses 20 through 31. If you would like to read along, you can find it on page 1346 of your pew Bible. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says to them. See, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because you shoved with flank and shoulder, butting all the weak sheep with your horns, until you have driven them away. I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another. I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will make a covenant of peace with them, and rid the land of savage beasts, so that they may live in the wilderness and sleep in the forest in safety. I will make them and the places surrounding my hill a blessing. I will send down showers in season. There will be showers of blessings. The trees will yield their fruit, and the ground will yield its crops. The people will be secure in their land, They will know that I am the Lord when I break the bars of their yoke and rescue them from the hands of those who enslaved them. They will no longer be plundered by the nations, nor will wild animals devour them. They will live in safety, and no one will make them afraid. I will provide for them a land renowned for its crops, and they will no longer be victims of famine in the land or bear the scorn of the nations. They will know that I, the Lord their God, am with them, and that they, the Israelites, are my people, declares the sovereign Lord. For you are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, and I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord. Would you pray with me? Holy Spirit, come and be with us. Fill our hearts with your presence. Clear our ears to your message. Speak to each and every one of us today. Amen. So I have a confession for you all. I have been feeling a little stressed this Christmas season, more than usual. I'm going to blame my cold on it. So I have been on a quest for inner peace, that, to get in the Christmas spirit. And as I was flicking channels the other day, I found a good piece of advice in the least likely place. Dr. Phil. He said, the trick to inner peace is to finish everything you have started. And I thought, what a great idea. I'm going to try that. So before church today, I finished the Christmas cookies, the candy canes, the eggnog, the pumpkin pie, and the bourbon balls. And man, I'm feeling a lot better. No, I'm a believer, though, that finding peace in the Christmas time is one of the hardest times to find it. But truly, peace is never easy. Finding that calmness, that sense of peace. But no matter how bad off we think we have it, Ezekiel lived in a time that was much worse and experienced it in a much worse way than we can imagine. He lived in a time of war, a time where his home city was demolished, where he was taken as a prisoner of war, where his hometown was eventually decimated, and where his whole people were brought into exile. God willing, I hope I will never find a time that is anywhere close to that lack of peace. I think the only people in America who truly can say they've experienced something like that are our veterans who fought in wars, where they truly saw what war can do to people and what people can do in war. There are also those people who live through this every day. There are wars going on throughout the world where whole peoples are being decimated, where we have refugees, where we have no idea if they will live to the next sunset. This is a land without peace. But we have been given a message of peace and a challenge to live for peace. Most of us are not ones who go out and commit violence, although many of us turn aside when we see it, or try to ignore that it's happening. But I think every last one of us have experienced in our lives the time without peace. We live in a land that is steeped in fear. The nightmares that I was telling the kids about make us nervous and uncomfortable and truly scared. But it's not just nightmares. The things that we are afraid of are real. For Ezekiel, his fear was in a time of exile, a time where the center place of worship, the temple, had been destroyed, where the whole country had been moved out. Jerusalem, that had been the icon of their whole country, had been leveled. They lived with the enemy. They were surrounded by people who were more powerful. It was as if they were wandering in a wilderness and the wild beasts were circling. Our fears are different. Our fears come at us in very different ways than thinking we will be conquered or killed. But we do have fears. And these fears are reinforced time and time again. When we turn on the TV, we see commercials that feed our fear. Our culture tells us that it is time to fear. It could be that we are afraid that we will not get our kids or our grandkids the gifts they want the most for Christmas, and that they will be crushed, and they will just have a horrible holiday. It could be that we have a fear that our car is not as good as our neighbors, or that maybe our car won't make it to the next turn around the neighborhood. We have a fear that our retirement account is not enough, and every time we see a commercial that says, "Have you invested wisely?" It's just one more chink in that nervousness about our security. Some have fears that they won't eat enough that day. I tend to have fears that I won't get a chance to eat what I want to eat today. And then we hear from our leaders. It should be a message of peace and hope, but instead, we are added more fears onto our plate. One party tells us to fear if the other one is in charge, or they will destroy our country. And the other party says the exact same thing, that if you vote for this person or this party, we will cease to be a country. We have been hearing for 20 years now that there's a war on Christmas, and if we don't say Merry Christmas to every person we meet, the entire religion of Christianity will be diminished, even if the person telling us Happy Holidays is Jewish or Muslim or has nothing to do with Christians. We're told to fear those who look differently than us, especially those Muslims, because everyone who worships Islam is a terrorist and will have us all killed. We're told to fear those terrorists. Little known fact, the average is that international Muslims have killed 2 people annually by terrorism. Meanwhile, the ultra-right that call themselves Christians, those terrorists have been killing about 10 Americans every year out of terrorism. We're told to fear race. If someone looks differently than you, they have to want evil things towards you. These are the things that are reinforced time and time again. We hear these messages every day. And all of these fears are being pushed on us by leaders who want nothing more than power and money. The companies and cultures say that we have to have the best toys, the best cars, the best homes. So that way they can make more money. We're told that we better go through the right stock and bonds people so that way they can earn their commissions. And our leaders want to make sure you're so scared you won't vote for anybody but them. They gain power. They gain stability. While we lose peace. When I read Ezekiel's prophecy, I realized what a message for us today. What a prophecy to hear that we worship a God who has given us a covenant of peace. Peace is the absence of fear. That is the covenant we live in. We don't have to live in fear. We do not have to go through our days nervous and stressed out. We don't have to think the wild beasts are at our heels or that our enemies are at our doorstep. When Jesus Christ came on the first Christmas, he changed the world of fear to one that we can never have to wallow in it again. He gave us the promise that God has already won. That Jesus Christ is stronger than any enemy we could imagine. That love and grace is greater than fear and want. That the Good Shepherd is stronger than the poor shepherds leading us astray. It is a promise that no matter what happens on this earth, we are in God's hands. God is holding on to us and will never let us go. We see glimpses of this promise. Every time I come into this sanctuary and I sit down with those kids and I see their smiles, I see glimpses of the peace that God has brought to us. Every time I read the words of Scripture that show God's love, every time I see your all's faces and know that God has brought us together as a family, I know what that peace of Christ is like. And then when I go out of this building, it gets harder. The rest of the world comes crashing down. And that is where Advent comes into play. We are promised that Jesus Christ will come again. The shepherd that is the servant David. We will see the covenant of peace in all of its glory, where there will be a land that is known for its crops and its bounty, where the wild animals have been scattered, where the enemies are no more. We will live in a time that there is no fear and there is peace all around. This is the promise of Advent. But while we are waiting on that promise, while we are waiting for the God of peace and love and glory to come again, we are also given an Advent challenge. Be Christ in this world. We are the people of Christ. We are Jesus' arms. We are Jesus' legs. And we are Jesus' mouth. And we are commanded to go into the world and be that message of peace and that promise of peace. We are to stand up against war unless there is absolutely no other alternative. We are to stand up against fear, especially fear that is used for the gain of other people. We are to stand for peace. We are to bring that to everyone, especially to those people who don't have a concept of what peace is. We are an Advent people. We are a people waiting on a promise that we have been given the skills and the power to be that promise to others. Amen.